Today, we're going to dig into a really cool idea from Aldous Huxley. It's about two totally different ways to tell a story. And trust me, once you see this distinction, you're going to start noticing it absolutely everywhere. So let's get into it. So let's start with a big question. Can a powerful story really handle the sheer messiness of actual life? I mean, can a great tragedy, for example, take in any random detail, no matter how weird or funny or just plain irrelevant, and still hit you with that same emotional force? Well, according to the famous literary critic I.A. Richards, the answer was a definite yes. His whole thing was that the best tragedies, like Shakespeare's, are so rock solid that they can absorb irony and all the mundane stuff of life without even flinching. And for a long time, that was pretty much the accepted wisdom. But Aldous Huxley wasn't quite buying it. He looked at that idea and thought, hang on a second, is that really true? And he came up with a counter idea. What if tragedy's power comes from what it intentionally leaves out, not from what it can absorb?
To really get what Huxley is talking about, first we have to understand what makes tragedy tick. And of course, he starts with a master himself, Shakespeare.
So Huxley looks at Shakespeare and says, yeah, of course his plays are full of cynicism and irony. Just think about it. Iago's pure evil is the perfect flip side to Othello's nobility. But Huxley's point is that these things aren't random. He calls them photographic negatives. They make the tragic emotions stand out even more, but they don't actually let any outside light in. It's all part of the same intense, sealed-off emotional world. Okay, so if Shakespeare's tragedy is this sort of closed emotional circuit, where do we find a different way of doing things? Well, Huxley tells us to look way, way back to the ancient world, specifically to Homer's Odyssey. This is where he finds what he calls the whole truth. Huxley points us to one of the most horrifying scenes in all of literature. I mean, it's just brutal. Odysseus and his crew are sailing through this narrow channel, and suddenly, the monster Scylla just snatches 6 of his best men right off the deck. They're dangling in the air, screaming his name. It is pure terror. And the emotional fallout is massive. Odysseus himself says it was the single worst thing he ever saw on his entire journey. So you've got the horror, you've got the grief, all the ingredients for a perfect soul-crushing tragedy are right there. But then Homer does something completely wild. Yep, he has them make dinner. Right after this unbelievable trauma, the survivors get to shore, they expertly prepare a meal, and they eat. The story just refuses to linger on that high-pitched emotion. It immediately slams you back into the mundane physical reality of being hungry. And this quote just lays it all out perfectly. Notice the order. First, they eat. Then they remember their friends and start to cry. And even in the middle of their weeping, sleep just takes over. The body's needs, hunger, exhaustion, are presented as just as important, if not more, than their grief. For Homer, this isn't a distraction from the story, this is the story. And that right there is what Huxley calls the whole truth. It's a way of telling a story that refuses to isolate just one feeling. It insists on showing you life as it's actually lived. A big, messy stew of the heroic and the hungry, the tragic and the tired, all happening at the exact same time. So now we've got our two competing models on the table, Shakespeare's pure tragedy and Homer's messy whole truth. And this sets up a really interesting clash. Huxley pulls out another great example from the novel Tom Jones. The heroine, Sophia, is this amazing, virtuous character. But at one point, she just has a clumsy accident. She falls off her horse, lands on her head, and her legs fly up in the air. The people standing around just laugh at her. It's embarrassing and kind of ridiculous. It feels totally true to life, right? But can you imagine that happening to a tragic heroine like Desdemona? No way. And this comparison really nails the difference. Tragedy is chemically pure. It only deals with the big, noble emotions. That's Desdemona's world. But the whole truth? That's Sophia's world. It includes everything: the body, hunger, embarrassing accidents. It actually embraces the exact kind of irrelevance that tragedy works so hard to filter out. So this all leads Huxley to his most radical conclusion. He basically says these two things cannot exist together in the same story. The second you let in the whole truth, a clumsy fall, a hero who needs a snack, the spell of tragedy is broken. They're like oil and water. So why? Why can't they coexist? To explain it, Huxley uses this absolutely brilliant metaphor from science. He says tragedy works like a pure chemical. By isolating one single element of human experience, like grief or honor or betrayal, it gives you this super concentrated dose that hits you hard and fast. It's like an emotional shot, designed for maximum impact. And this is probably his most powerful image. He says tragedy is just one small swirling eddy that the writer has artificially fenced off from the giant river of life. But wholly truthful art, its goal is to give you a sense of the entire river, everything flowing into the story, everything flowing out of it, and everything happening just upstream. And these different methods create a totally different experience for us. Tragedy gives you that feeling of heroic exaltation, a big, violent, almost apocalyptic emotional release. The whole truth, on the other hand, gives you something quieter, a sense of resignation and acceptance. The release is milder, sure, but Huxley argues it's the kind that actually sticks with you longer.
So why does any of this matter today? Well, Huxley argued that this simple distinction explains the entire direction that modern literature was heading in.
He looked at the most important writers of his time, Proust, Lawrence, Kafka, Hemingway, and he realized that even though their styles were completely different, they all shared one thing in common. They were more interested in the whole river than in the little eddy. They were all trying to capture the whole truth of experience.
But Huxley doesn't end by saying tragedy is dead. Not at all. He says it's just in a period of eclipse. It's been overshadowed for a bit by our modern obsession with the whole truth. Because ultimately, he argues, the human spirit needs both. We need the intense, cleansing fire of tragedy, and we also need the broad, compassionate wisdom of the whole truth.
And that leaves us with one last question. For you, when you pick a movie to watch or a book to read, what are you looking for? Which of these two kinds of stories speaks to you more right now? Is it the focused, heroic intensity of tragedy, or is it the messy, resilient, all-encompassing acceptance of the whole truth? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me for this one.